Michael whistled a happy tune as he unloaded the last box from the moving truck. Sunlight warmed his face as he surveyed his new home, a cozy, two-story house with a small but promising front yard. He was finally a homeowner. After years of saving, he'd found the perfect place in a quiet, suburban neighborhood. The houses all looked pretty similar, neat lawns and tidy hedges lined up in a row. It was different from the bustling city life he was used to, but he was ready for a change. More than anything, Michael was excited about the garden. The previous owners had just left a patch of plain grass, a blank canvas waiting for his touch. Michael loved gardening. It was his happy place, a way to relax and connect with nature. Back in the city, he only had a small balcony, but he'd managed to grow herbs and a few colorful flowers. Now, with a whole yard to work with, the possibilities seemed endless. He envisioned a riot of color, bright red geraniums, sunny yellow daffodils, and vibrant purple petunias. He wanted to create a welcoming space, a place where butterflies would flutter and bees would buzz. He imagined sitting on his porch, sipping iced tea, and admiring his handiwork. It would be his own little paradise. The first thing he did, even before unpacking all his boxes, was to visit the local nursery. He spent hours wandering through the aisles, inhaling the earthy scent of potting soil and the sweet fragrance of blossoms. He carefully selected a variety of plants, choosing ones that would thrive in the suburban climate. He bought bags of fertilizer and gardening tools, eager to get started. As he drove back home, his truck filled with flowers, Michael felt a sense of excitement bubbling inside him. He couldn't wait to get his hands dirty and transform his plain lawn into a beautiful garden. He knew it would take time and effort, but he was ready for the challenge. He pulled into his driveway, already planning where each flower would go. This wasn't just about planting flowers, it was about putting down roots, creating a home, and building a life in this new neighborhood. He wanted to share his love of gardening with his neighbors and contribute to the beauty of the community. He smiled, picturing the vibrant colors and sweet scents that would soon fill his yard. It was the start of a brand new chapter. Across the street, behind perfectly manicured rose bushes, lived Karen. Karen took pride in her neighborhood. She believed in order, conformity, and, above all, following the rules. As an active member of the Homeowners Association, HOA, she considered it her personal mission to uphold the community standards. She knew the HOA guidelines inside and out, and she wasn't afraid to point out any violations, no matter how small. From her living room window, Karen watched Michael's arrival with narrowed eyes. A new neighbor always meant potential disruption, and Karen was not a fan of disruption. She noticed the moving truck, the boxes being unloaded, and then, the truck full of flowers. Flowers, she thought, could be a problem. Not everyone had the same good taste, and some people just didn't understand the importance of uniformity. Karen kept a close watch on Michael's activities. She saw him unloading the flowers, carefully carrying them into his yard. She saw him digging in the dirt, preparing the soil. She consulted her HOA rule book, flipping through the pages on landscaping guidelines. Approved plant species, she muttered, scanning the list. Ornamental regulations. Lawn maintenance. A frown deepened on her face as she realized she didn't recognize any of the flowers Michael was planting. They were too colorful, too exotic, too different. They didn't fit the established aesthetic of the neighborhood. A wave of disapproval washed over her. This simply wouldn't do. Karen considered herself a protector of the neighborhood's values. She believed that rules were in place for a reason, to maintain property values and ensure a harmonious living environment. And she wasn't about to let some newcomer waltz in and disrupt the delicate balance with his unauthorized flora. She grabbed her clipboard and a pen, ready to document the violation. She marched out of her house, her high heels clicking on the sidewalk, a determined look on her face. She was ready to confront Michael and remind him of his responsibilities as a member of this community. She would explain, in no uncertain terms, that his flowers were not in compliance with the HOA guidelines and that he needed to rectify the situation immediately. She felt a sense of righteous indignation. The rules were the rules, and no one was above them. She was doing this for the good of the neighborhood, to preserve its beauty and maintain its order. And she wouldn't let anyone, not even a new neighbor with a truckload of colorful flowers, stand in her way. Oblivious to Karen's impending arrival, Michael spent the afternoon carefully planting his flowers. He dug small holes, gently placed each plant in the ground, and patted the soil around its roots. He arranged them according to color and height, creating a vibrant tapestry of blooms. The red geraniums formed a cheerful border, the yellow daffodils added a touch of sunshine, and the purple petunias cascaded down the edges of the flower bed. He even added some fragrant lavender, hoping to attract butterflies and bees. He worked with passion and precision, humming softly to himself as he imagined the finished product. He watered each plant carefully, ensuring they had enough moisture to thrive. He stepped back to admire his work, a wide smile spreading across his face. The garden was already starting to take shape, transforming the plain lawn into a welcoming oasis. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the neighborhood, Michael finished planting the last flower. He stood back, surveying his creation with pride. It was even more beautiful than he had imagined. The colors popped against the green grass, creating a stunning visual display. The flowers seemed to dance in the gentle breeze, their petals swaying back and forth. He felt a deep sense of satisfaction. He had poured his heart and soul into this garden, and it showed. It was a reflection of his personality, his love for nature, and his desire to create beauty in the world. He couldn't wait to see it in full bloom, a riot of color and fragrance that would brighten up the entire neighborhood. He imagined his neighbors stopping to admire his garden, children pointing at the colorful flowers, and butterflies flitting from bloom to bloom. He hoped it would bring joy to everyone who saw it, a small oasis of beauty in their everyday lives. He was proud of his contribution to the community, a tangible expression of his desire to make the world a little bit brighter. He grabbed his gardening tools and headed towards the garage, his heart filled with happiness. He couldn't wait to wake up the next morning and see his garden bathed in sunlight. He knew it would take time and effort to maintain, but he was ready for the challenge. He was a gardener, a creator of beauty, and he was determined to make his new neighborhood a more vibrant and welcoming place, one flower at a time. He thought to himself, "This is home." And he was happy. The next morning, Michael woke up eager to see his garden in the daylight. He brewed a cup of coffee and walked onto his porch, ready to bask in the beauty he had created. But his peaceful moment was shattered by the sight of Karen marching across the street, clipboard in hand, a thunderous expression on her face. "Excuse me," Karen called out, her voice sharp and piercing. "Are you the new homeowner?" Michael, slightly startled, nodded. "Yes, I am. Michael Jones." Karen stopped at the edge of his lawn, her eyes fixed on the flowers. "I'm Karen, and I'm a member of the Homeowners Association. I couldn't help but notice your landscaping choices." She said landscaping choices, as if she were discussing a particularly unpleasant crime. Michael's smile faltered. "Is there a problem?" "A problem?" Karen scoffed. "Yes, there's a problem. These flowers are not in compliance with HOA regulations. They're not on the approved list." She tapped her clipboard for emphasis. Michael frowned. "Approved list? I wasn't aware there was an approved list. I just wanted to add some color to the neighborhood." "Ignorance is no excuse," Karen snapped. "Every homeowner receives a copy of the HOA guidelines. It clearly states which plant species are permitted. These exotic blooms are not among them." Michael tried to remain calm. "But they're just flowers. They're not hurting anyone. In fact, I think they enhance the beauty of the neighborhood." "Beauty is subjective," Karen retorted. "And the HOA has established objective standards. These flowers are a violation, and they need to be removed immediately." Michael was taken aback by her rudeness. "Removed? But I just planted them yesterday. I put a lot of work into this garden. That's irrelevant, Karen said, her voice cold and unwavering. The rules are the rules. You have 48 hours to remove these unauthorized plants. If you fail to comply, you will be subject to fines. Michael's frustration began to rise. Fines? For planting flowers? Yes, fines, Karen confirmed. The HOA takes these matters very seriously. We cannot allow homeowners to disregard the regulations. It sets a bad precedent. She adjusted her sunglasses, a smug look on her face. Consider this your official warning. With that, she turned on her heel and marched back across the street, leaving Michael standing in his garden, stunned and disheartened. His beautiful creation, the source of so much joy just hours before, had suddenly become a battleground. He couldn't believe that someone could be so petty and controlling over something as simple as flowers. This was not the welcoming neighborhood he had imagined. Determined not to give up so easily, Michael decided to try reasoning with Karen. Later that afternoon, he walked across the street, hoping to find her in a more receptive mood. He found her tending to her perfectly symmetrical rose bushes, snipping off dead leaves with surgical precision. Karen, Michael began, his voice polite but firm. Could we talk for a moment about the flowers? Karen sighed dramatically, as if she were being greatly inconvenienced. I thought I made myself perfectly clear this morning, Mr. Jones. I understand that the flowers aren't on the approved list, Michael said, but I truly believe they add value to the neighborhood. They bring joy, they attract butterflies, they make the street look more vibrant. Karen didn't even look up from her rose bushes. The HOA has established standards for a reason. We can't just allow everyone to plant whatever they want. It would be chaos. But it's just flowers, Michael pleaded. They're not offensive, they're not blocking anyone's view, they're not causing any harm. Why can't we make an exception? Karen finally straightened up, her eyes cold and unwavering. There are no exceptions, Mr. Jones. Rules are rules, and they apply to everyone. If I let you get away with this, everyone else will want to plant unauthorized flowers, and before you know it, the whole neighborhood will be a mess. Michael tried a different approach. Have you considered that maybe the approved list is outdated? Maybe it's time to update it to include more colorful and diverse options. My flowers could be a starting point. Karen scoffed. The approved list is perfectly adequate. It reflects the established aesthetic of this community. We don't need any improvements from you. Michael's patience was wearing thin. But what's the harm? Why are you so opposed to a little bit of color and beauty? Karen's voice rose slightly. I am not opposed to beauty, Mr. Jones. I am opposed to violations of the HOA guidelines. And if you don't remove those flowers within 48 hours, I will be forced to issue a fine. And I assure you, the fines will continue to accrue until you comply. Michael was incredulous. You're threatening me with fines? Over flowers? I am enforcing the HOA regulations, Mr. Jones, Karen said, her voice dripping with self-righteousness. And I suggest you take this matter very seriously. The HOA has the authority to take legal action against homeowners who refuse to comply. Michael stared at her in disbelief. He couldn't believe how unreasonable and inflexible she was being. He had tried to reason with her, to appeal to her sense of compassion and common sense, but it was clear that she was unmoved. He realized that he was dealing with someone who was so entrenched in her own beliefs and so determined to enforce the rules that she was completely incapable of seeing things from his perspective. Defeated, Michael sighed. I guess there's no point in arguing with you. That's right, there isn't, Karen said, a smug look on her face. I suggest you start digging. She turned back to her rose bushes, effectively ending the conversation. Michael walked back across the street, his heart heavy with disappointment and frustration. He knew he was facing an uphill battle, and he wasn't sure how to win. The threat of fines loomed large, and he didn't want to cause any trouble for himself or his family. But he also didn't want to give in to Karen's petty tyranny. He was determined to find a way to fight back and protect his beautiful garden. True to her word, Karen wasted no time in issuing Michael fines. The first one arrived just days after their confrontation, a formal letter from the HOA stating that he was in violation of landscaping regulations and assessed a fine of $250. Michael was shocked. $250 for flowers. It seemed excessive, almost punitive. He tried to ignore it, hoping Karen would eventually tire of her crusade. But the fines kept coming, each one more exorbitant than the last. A week later, another letter arrived, this time for $500. Then, another one for $750. It was escalating rapidly, and Michael felt like he was being unfairly targeted. He started to notice other things too. Karen seemed to be constantly watching him, scrutinizing every little detail of his property. If a leaf fell on his sidewalk, she would be out there with her clipboard, ready to issue another violation. If his grass grew a millimeter too long, he would receive a sternly worded notice. It felt like she was deliberately trying to make his life miserable. Michael couldn't shake the feeling that he was being discriminated against. He noticed that other houses in the neighborhood had minor landscaping variations that were not in strict compliance with the HOA guidelines, but they were never cited. It seemed like he was the only one being held to such an impossible standard. He also couldn't help but notice that he was the only black homeowner on the street. The fines were starting to take a toll on Michael's finances. He had carefully budgeted for his new house, but he hadn't anticipated these unexpected expenses. He was forced to cut back on other things, sacrificing his hobbies and social activities in order to pay the mounting fees. The joy of owning his own home was quickly turning into a source of stress and anxiety. He considered removing the flowers, but he refused to give in to Karen's bullying tactics. He believed he had a right to express himself through his garden, and he wasn't going to let her take that away from him. He decided to fight back, to challenge the fines and expose Karen's unfair treatment. He started documenting everything, taking photos of his garden, keeping records of the fines, and noting Karen's constant surveillance. He knew he needed evidence to support his claims of discrimination. He also started researching the HOA guidelines, looking for loopholes or inconsistencies that he could exploit. He felt isolated and alone in his struggle. He didn't know any of his neighbors well enough to ask for help, and he was afraid of making things worse by stirring up trouble. But he refused to be intimidated. He was determined to stand up for his rights and protect his beautiful garden, no matter the cost. He knew this was more than just about flowers, it was about fairness, equality, and the right to live peacefully in his own home. Michael decided to formally appeal the fines with the HOA. He drafted a carefully worded letter, outlining his concerns about the unfair treatment and highlighting the positive impact his garden had on the neighborhood. He included photos of his vibrant flower bed and argued that his landscaping choices were not detrimental to the community's aesthetic. He requested a hearing to present his case in person. He mailed the letter, hoping for a fair and impartial review. But his hopes were quickly dashed. A few days later, he received a terse response from the HOA, denying his appeal. The letter stated that his landscaping was in clear violation of the regulations and that the fines would stand. It offered no explanation or justification for the decision. Michael was furious. He couldn't believe that his appeal had been dismissed so easily, without even a proper hearing. He suspected that Karen was somehow influencing the decision-making process. He knew she was a powerful figure in the HOA, with close ties to other board members. He decided to investigate further. He started attending HOA meetings, hoping to gain a better understanding of how the organization operated. He quickly realized that Karen wielded considerable influence. She seemed to control the agenda, dominate the discussions, and sway the votes. Other board members deferred to her opinions, and few dared to challenge her authority. Michael discovered that Karen was the head of the landscaping committee, giving her direct control over the enforcement of the regulations. He also learned that she had a reputation for being strict and uncompromising, often targeting homeowners for minor infractions. It became clear to Michael that Karen was using her position to harass him and that his appeal had been doomed from the start. He tried to speak to other board members privately, hoping to find someone who would listen to his concerns. But most of them were either afraid of Karen or unwilling to get involved in the dispute. He felt like he was banging his head against a brick wall. The HOA seemed to be a closed system, impenetrable to outside influence. Michael's frustration grew with each passing day. He felt like he was being victimized by a corrupt and biased organization. He was losing sleep, his appetite was gone, and he was constantly on edge, waiting for the next fine to arrive. The joy of owning his own home had been completely overshadowed by this endless battle with the HOA. He started to question whether it was worth fighting. Maybe it would be easier to just remove the flowers and be done with it. But he couldn't bring himself to give in. He knew that if he surrendered, he would be sending a message that bullying and discrimination were acceptable. He had to stand up for his principles, even if it meant facing continued harassment and financial hardship. He just wished he knew how to break through Karen's influence and get a fair hearing. He felt trapped and desperate. Adding to Michael's burden was the fact that his father, Robert Jones, was the president of the HOA. However, Robert had been out of the country for several weeks, attending an international conference on sustainable community development. He was completely unaware of the situation unfolding in his own neighborhood. Michael had always been fiercely independent. He didn't want to rely on his father's position to solve his problems. He wanted to handle this situation on his own, to prove that he could stand up for himself and fight for what was right. He also didn't want to bother his father with what he considered to be a petty issue. He knew his father was busy with important work, and he didn't want to distract him with a squabble over flowers. He remembered his father telling him, "Son, you have to learn to solve your own problems. Don't always come running to me for help. You're a strong, capable young man. You can handle it." Michael had taken those words to heart. So, he kept the situation with Karen and the HOA a secret from his father. He didn't want his father to think he was weak or incompetent. He wanted to show him that he could be a responsible homeowner and a valued member of the community, without relying on his father's influence. But as the fines continued to pile up and Karen's harassment intensified, Michael began to question his decision. He was starting to feel overwhelmed and isolated. He wondered if he was being foolishly stubborn, sacrificing his own well-being for the sake of pride. He knew his father would be furious if he found out what was happening. Robert Jones was a man of integrity and principle. He believed in fairness, equality, and justice. He would never tolerate discrimination or abuse of power. Michael knew that his father would immediately step in to protect him, but he was still hesitant to ask for help. He wrestled with his conscience, torn between his desire for independence and his need for support. He knew he couldn't keep this secret forever. The situation was spiraling out of control, and he was running out of options. He knew he had to make a decision, and he had to make it soon. He thought, maybe it's not about bothering him, maybe it's about doing the right thing. He began to consider telling his father everything, despite his initial reservations. The thought of his father's reaction, both disappointment and anger at Karen, weighed heavily on his mind. He knew this could change everything. The situation was rapidly deteriorating. Karen, emboldened by her success in blocking Michael's appeal, intensified her efforts to have the garden removed. She started circulating a petition among the neighbors, demanding that the HOA take stronger action against Michael for his repeated violations. She portrayed him as a troublemaker who was deliberately flouting the rules and undermining the community's standards. Michael noticed that some of his neighbors, who had initially seemed friendly, were now giving him cold stares and avoiding him. He felt like he was being ostracized, branded as an outsider. He overheard snippets of conversations, whispers behind his back, and judgmental comments about his garden. The HOA sent Michael a final warning, stating that if he didn't remove the flowers within a week, they would hire a landscaping company to do it for him, and he would be responsible for the cost. The cost, they claimed, would be added to his growing list of fines and could result in a lien being placed on his house. Michael felt a wave of panic wash over him. He couldn't afford to have his house at risk. The thought of losing everything he had worked so hard for was terrifying. He looked at his garden, now bursting with color and life, and felt a deep sense of despair. It was more than just flowers, it was a symbol of his dreams, his aspirations, his connection to nature. And now, it was all about to be taken away from him. He felt helpless and discriminated against. He had tried to reason with Karen, to appeal to the HOA, to comply with the regulations, but nothing seemed to work. He was trapped in a system that was rigged against him, with no way out. He felt like he was being targeted simply because he was different, because his garden didn't fit the narrow, conformist standards of the neighborhood. He started to neglect his garden, his heart too heavy to tend to it. Weeds began to sprout, the flowers started to wilt, and the once vibrant colors began to fade. It was a reflection of his own inner turmoil, his sense of hopelessness and defeat. He spent sleepless nights tossing and turning, agonizing over what to do. He knew he couldn't afford to ignore the final warning, but he also couldn't bring himself to destroy his beautiful garden. He felt like he was being forced to choose between his financial security and his personal integrity. He felt backed into a corner, with no good options left. He looked at the pictures of his father on his desk, smiling and confident, and a wave of guilt washed over him. He knew his father would want him to fight for what was right, but he also knew that his father wouldn't want him to sacrifice his financial stability. He wondered what his father would do in this situation. He knew he couldn't put it off any longer. He had to make a decision, and he had to make it now. The garden, his sanctuary, was in imminent danger. He was running out of time. With the weight of the world on his shoulders, Michael finally made the call. His father answered on the second ring, his voice sounding tired but warm. "Michael? Is everything all right, son? You usually don't call me so late." Michael hesitated, unsure how to begin. "Dad, I need to tell you something. It's about the house, about the HOA." He proceeded to recount the entire story, from the moment he planted the flowers to the final warning threatening a lien on his property. He explained Karen's harassment, the unfair fines, and the blatant discrimination he had experienced. He held nothing back, pouring out his frustration, his anger, and his sense of helplessness. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Michael could hear his father breathing heavily, but he couldn't discern his emotions. Finally, Robert spoke, his voice low and controlled. "Michael, why didn't you tell me this sooner?" Michael explained his reasons for keeping it a secret, his desire to be independent, his reluctance to bother his father with what he thought was a petty issue. "I wanted to handle it on my own, Dad. I didn't want you to think I couldn't take care of myself." Robert sighed. "Son, I understand that, but this is not a petty issue. This is about fairness, about justice, about your right to live peacefully in your own home. And it sounds like you've been dealing with a lot." Then, his voice changed, hardening with anger. "This woman, Karen, she's been harassing you. Discriminating against you. And the HOA has allowed it to happen. That's unacceptable." Michael could feel his father's fury radiating through the phone. He knew his father was a man of action, and he wasn't going to let this injustice stand. "Dad, I don't want you to cause any trouble," Michael said, fearing the repercussions of his father's intervention. "I just wanted you to know what was going on." "Trouble?" Robert scoffed. "This isn't about trouble, Michael. This is about right and wrong. And what this woman is doing is wrong. I'm coming home, son. I'll be on the first flight out in the morning. We're going to fix this, together." Michael felt a surge of relief wash over him. He had finally shared his burden, and he knew that his father would be there to support him. He wasn't alone anymore. "Thank you, Dad," Michael said, his voice choked with emotion. "I don't know what I would have done without you." "Don't worry, son," Robert replied, his voice filled with determination. Everything is going to be all right. I promise you, Karen is going to regret the day she ever messed with my son. Michael knew that his father's promise was not an empty one. He knew that Robert Jones would move heaven and earth to protect his family and uphold his principles. And he knew that Karen was about to face the consequences of her actions. The battle was far from over, but for the first time in weeks, Michael felt a glimmer of hope. He knew that with his father by his side, he could finally win this fight. Robert arrived home early the next morning, his face grim and determined. He immediately called Michael and, without a word, embraced him tightly. The embrace spoke volumes: reassurance, support, and unwavering love. After a quick breakfast, Robert wasted no time. He contacted the HOA secretary and demanded an emergency meeting, citing a matter of grave importance that required immediate attention. The meeting was scheduled for that evening at the community clubhouse. As the board members and a few curious residents trickled in, Karen entered, a self-satisfied smirk on her face. She assumed this was just another routine meeting where she would continue to assert her dominance. She had no idea what was coming. Robert strode to the head of the table, his presence commanding and authoritative. He cleared his throat, his gaze sweeping across the room. "Good evening, everyone. I apologize for calling this meeting on such short notice, but I assure you, the matter at hand is of utmost importance to our community." He paused, his eyes locking on Karen. "I have recently learned of a situation involving one of our newest residents, Mr. Michael Jones, and the enforcement of our landscaping regulations." Karen shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her smirk fading slightly. She could sense that something was amiss. Robert continued, his voice rising with controlled anger. "It has come to my attention that Mr. Jones has been subjected to a campaign of harassment and discrimination by certain members of this HOA, specifically regarding the flowers he planted in his front yard." He turned to face Karen directly. "Ms. Karen, I am deeply disappointed and frankly disgusted to learn of your behavior towards my son." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Karen's face turned white as a sheet. She stammered, "Mr. Jones, I didn't know that he was my son." Robert interrupted, his voice booming. "That's irrelevant, Ms. Karen. What is relevant is that you have abused your power, selectively enforced the rules, and subjected an innocent homeowner to unjust fines and intimidation." He pulled out a stack of documents, including copies of the fines, the HOA correspondence, and Michael's detailed notes. "I have reviewed all the evidence, and it is clear that Mr. Jones has been unfairly targeted. The fines are excessive, the enforcement is discriminatory, and your behavior is reprehensible." He slammed his hand on the table, causing everyone to jump. "This ends now. I, as president of the HOA, am immediately rescinding all fines levied against Mr. Jones. Furthermore, I am issuing a formal warning to Ms. Karen regarding her abuse of power and her discriminatory actions. Such behavior will not be tolerated in this community." Robert paused, allowing his words to sink in. The room was silent, everyone staring at Karen in disbelief. Her carefully constructed facade of authority had crumbled, revealing the petty and vindictive person beneath. The stunned silence was broken only by Karen's barely audible whimper. The tide had turned. Robert wasn't finished. He turned his attention back to the rest of the board members. "I am also issuing a directive to review and revise our HOA guidelines. We need to ensure that they are fair, equitable, and inclusive. We must eliminate any language that could be used to discriminate against homeowners based on their race, ethnicity, or personal preferences." He paused, his gaze stern. "Furthermore, I am proposing the formation of a committee to review all past fines and violations to identify any other instances of selective enforcement or abuse of power. We need to clean house and restore integrity to this organization." He then focused his attention back on Karen, who was now visibly trembling. "Ms. Karen, your actions have not only harmed my son, but they have also damaged the reputation of this community. I expect you to issue a formal apology to Mr. Jones for your behavior." He leaned forward, his voice low and menacing. Let me be clear, any further acts of harassment or discrimination will result in your immediate removal from the HOA and potential legal action. I will not tolerate such behavior in this community, and I will not allow anyone to abuse their power to target innocent homeowners. He straightened up, his voice regaining its authority. This meeting is adjourned. I expect all board members to cooperate fully with the review of the HOA guidelines and the investigation of past violations. We have a lot of work to do to rebuild trust and restore fairness to this community. As the meeting broke up, the other board members avoided eye contact with Karen, whispering amongst themselves. Some offered Michael apologetic glances. The residents who had attended the meeting filed out in stunned silence, murmuring about the shocking revelations. Karen remained seated, her face buried in her hands, her body shaking with sobs. Her reign of terror had come to an abrupt and humiliating end. She had lost her power, her influence, and her reputation. Michael approached his father, his heart filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Dad," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "I don't know what to say." Robert placed a hand on his son's shoulder, his eyes filled with pride. "You don't have to say anything, son. I'm just glad I could be here for you. This community needed to be reminded what is right." As they walked out of the clubhouse together, Michael felt a sense of closure and relief. The nightmare was finally over. He had been vindicated, and Karen had been held accountable for her actions. But he knew that the work of rebuilding trust and fostering inclusivity in the community had just begun. He looked forward to working with his father and the other residents to create a more welcoming and equitable neighborhood for everyone. He knew it would take time and effort, but he was optimistic that they could make a difference. The first step had been taken. The day after the HOA meeting, something remarkable happened. Neighbors who had previously avoided Michael began to approach him, offering words of support and encouragement. They confessed that they had been intimidated by Karen's power and afraid to speak out against her, but they had always admired his garden and felt that he was being unfairly treated. Mrs. Henderson, an elderly woman who lived next door, brought Michael a plate of freshly baked cookies. "I'm so sorry for what you've been through, dear," she said, her eyes filled with sympathy. "Karen has been bullying people in this neighborhood for years. We're all so glad that someone finally stood up to her." Mr. Johnson, a retired teacher who lived across the street, stopped by with a bouquet of flowers from his own garden. "Your flowers are beautiful, Michael," he said, smiling warmly. "They bring so much joy to the neighborhood. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Even some of the board members who had previously sided with Karen reached out to Michael, offering their apologies and expressing their willingness to work towards a more equitable and inclusive community. They admitted that they had been afraid of Karen's wrath and had blindly followed her lead, but they now realized that they had been complicit in her abuse of power. A group of neighbors even organized a community cleanup day to help Michael restore his garden to its former glory. They weeded, fertilized, and planted new flowers, transforming the once neglected space into a vibrant oasis once again. Michael was overwhelmed by the outpouring of support. He realized that Karen's actions had not only harmed him, but they had also alienated many of the residents in the neighborhood. Her reign of terror had created an atmosphere of fear and intimidation, but now that she had been exposed, people were finally finding the courage to speak out against her. He felt a renewed sense of hope for the future of the community. He realized that even though Karen's actions had been divisive and destructive, they had also inadvertently brought people together. They had created a shared sense of purpose and a determination to create a more welcoming and equitable neighborhood for everyone. He knew that there would still be challenges ahead, but he was confident that with the support of his neighbors and the leadership of his father, they could overcome them. He looked forward to working with the community to revise the HOA guidelines, to promote inclusivity, and to create a neighborhood where everyone felt valued and respected. He knew that it would take time and effort, but he was optimistic that they could make a real difference. The seeds of change had been planted, and they were starting to sprout. The community was finally starting to bloom. Karen became a pariah in the neighborhood. The shame and humiliation were overwhelming. People whispered about her behind her back, avoided her at the grocery store, and pointedly ignored her at community events. Her carefully constructed facade of respectability had been shattered, revealing the petty and vindictive person beneath. She received a formal letter from the HOA, stripping her of her position as head of the landscaping committee and suspending her membership for a year. The letter cited her abuse of power, her discriminatory actions, and her failure to uphold the values of the community. Her phone rang constantly with angry calls from neighbors, scolding her for her behavior and accusing her of damaging the reputation of the neighborhood. Some even threatened to take legal action against her for her harassment of Michael. She tried to apologize to Michael, but he refused to speak to her. He couldn't forgive her for the pain and suffering she had caused him and for the way she had tried to destroy his dreams. He felt that she had shown her true colors, and he had no desire to have any further contact with her. She became increasingly isolated and withdrawn, spending most of her time holed up in her house, avoiding contact with the outside world. She lost her appetite, her sleep patterns were disrupted, and she became consumed by guilt and regret. Her perfectly manicured rose bushes began to wither and die, a reflection of her own inner turmoil. Her once pristine lawn became overgrown with weeds, a symbol of her neglect and despair. She realized that she had made a terrible mistake. She had allowed her obsession with rules and order to blind her to the humanity of others. She had become so focused on enforcing the regulations that she had forgotten the importance of compassion, empathy, and understanding. She knew that she could never fully repair the damage she had caused, but she was determined to make amends. She started volunteering at a local community center, helping underprivileged children with their homework and providing meals to the homeless. She also began donating anonymously to various charities that supported social justice and equality. She knew that these actions couldn't erase her past mistakes, but she hoped that they could help her to become a better person. She wanted to learn from her experiences and to use her newfound understanding to make a positive difference in the world. She never fully regained her reputation in the neighborhood, but she slowly began to earn the respect of some of her neighbors. They saw that she was genuinely remorseful for her actions and that she was committed to making amends. They started to forgive her, and they even began to offer her small gestures of kindness and support. Karen had learned a harsh lesson, and she was determined to use it to create a better future for herself and for the community. She knew she had a long way to go, but she was finally on the right path. With the support of his father and the newfound camaraderie of his neighbors, Michael was able to fully enjoy his beautiful garden once again. He spent hours tending to his flowers, watering them, and pruning them, taking pride in their vibrant colors and sweet fragrances. He often invited his neighbors to stroll through his garden, sharing his love of nature and his passion for beauty. The HOA revised its guidelines to be more inclusive and equitable, eliminating any language that could be used to discriminate against homeowners. They also established a process for reviewing and approving new plant species, ensuring that all residents had a voice in shaping the aesthetic of the community. The neighborhood became more welcoming and inclusive, celebrating its diversity and embracing its differences. Residents organized potlucks, block parties, and community events that brought people together and fostered a sense of belonging. They learned to appreciate each other's unique perspectives and to value the contributions that everyone made to the community. Michael became an active member of the HOA, advocating for policies that promoted fairness, equality, and social justice. He used his experiences to educate others about the dangers of discrimination and the importance of standing up for what is right. His garden became a symbol of hope and resilience, a reminder that even in the face of adversity, beauty can still bloom. It inspired other residents to express their creativity and individuality, transforming the neighborhood into a vibrant and diverse tapestry of colors, textures, and styles. Michael and his father grew even closer, their bond strengthened by the challenges they had overcome together. Robert was proud of his son's courage, his integrity, and his unwavering commitment to justice. Michael was grateful for his father's support, his guidance, and his unwavering love. Years later, Michael's garden continued to thrive, a testament to his passion, his dedication, and his unwavering belief in the power of beauty. The neighborhood had become a shining example of inclusivity, diversity, and community spirit, a place where everyone felt welcomed, valued, and respected. And it all started with a few colorful flowers and a man who dared to stand up for what was right. Michael often sat on his porch, sipping iced tea, and admiring his garden, a wide smile spreading across his face. He knew that he had found his home, not just in the house, but in the community. He had finally realized his dream of creating a welcoming and beautiful space, a place where everyone could thrive and flourish. And he knew that his journey had just begun. The flowers bloomed brighter than ever before. The end.